Hello, Lightworkers, Awakened Souls. We are so excited to welcome our guest today here on Ascend the Matrix podcast. My name is Chrys King. I'm a medicine alchemist, ascended astrologer, shamanic healer, ascension and awakening guide, web designer, blah, blah, blah. Like Brittany and I have a whole
Love
list.
it.
And I'm so excited to have Brittany on with me, my co host. Brittany, introduce yourself.
Hello, Light Beams. My name is Brittany Renee, psychic intuitive, embodiment coach, all of the things, energetic grid worker, code collector, healer. Super excited to be here today. We've got an incredible guest, Alandra. If you want to introduce yourself and who you are, we'd love for our audience to meet you.
Sure. Hello, I'm Alandra. I am a poet and a musician and a light worker, and a survivor of trauma-based mind control in various forms. Most people these days know me for the latter thing, uh, doing a lot of work to clear trauma-based mind control, satanic ritual abuse, secret space program abuse, and all sort of related things. Um, so I've been focusing on that quite a bit. Um, I yeah, and I like the titles that you two have. I'm like, oh yeah, I could use some titles like that too. That would be good. Yeah, grid worker definitely applies. Um,
I
yeah,
think we all
yeah.
fall somewhere under some of these umbrellas, whether we've
Mhm.
taken on their titles or not. And you definitely are in the same caliber of group I would put us in, energy workers, shamanic practitioners, people who do work between realms. And I've actually had the fortunate chance of working with you as a client. And it was a beautiful experience that I had. And I want everyone to know about the work that you do. So before we go into some more intense or deeper topics, tell us about your poetry and your music and the healing work that you currently offer.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I don't even think I said coach. Coach is like the main one of the main things now.
Mm.
Yeah, so I help people deprogram from trauma-based mind control. So survivors of all those kinds of programs come to release trauma and unpack all that stuff and get to a more healed place. Uh, I also teach meditation. I have groups pretty regularly that are open drop-in groups that people can join. Um, I have my YouTube channel that has some recorded meditations on it, so some stuff that's all sort of in the same general vein of yeah, light work and coaching and helping people raise their vibration. Yeah.
Yeah, and being of service.
Hmm.
Yes.
Yes. Well, the work that I had done with you was very powerful because I've been through some, we all have on this planet, been through some form of mind control due
Hmm.
to the false matrix that we're in. Mine was a little bit more intense due to some people I was around and relationships that I was in, some contracts that I've made on some level. And you definitely helped shed some light on some of that. And these are very intense topics. So it's beautiful that you're bringing together music and poetry. And I always people feel my childlike energy a lot, and I feel your inner child at play. Even during the healing work, I could feel that childlike innocence coming out. And so it's really beautiful that you're able to marry together um, darkness and light in such a beautiful way because you've been through some really intense things that most people have not been through. And we'll talk about that.
Yeah.
And you're currently offering sessions at Soul Connections. Is that
Hmm.
where you're doing your meditations? Because you're
Yeah.
in Mount Shasta, correct?
Yeah, I'm in Mount Shasta, California. People can come to Soul Connections. It's a local crystal shop where I have my group. People can also join online on Zoom, and that's mostly an email list where I send out the announcements. Yeah.
Yeah, very cool.
Hmm.
So, can you take us back in time a little bit? So, you're living in Shasta now. You offer meditation. You are a grid worker, light worker, healer. What brought you to this point exactly? We all have a story that gets us to where we are, um,
Yeah,
but um, go back as far as you want to, and let's work our way toward how you're doing the work that you're doing now.
sure. Thanks. Shasta has been in my heart since the beginning, from a very young age in this body and from many other past life perspectives. Shasta is a place that I keep coming back to. Um, there's an aspect of me that is on the Lemurian councils under the
That's what I
mountain.
was just about to ask, was if
Yeah.
it was Lemurian. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm really tuned in there. Um, I astrally travel under the mountain pretty regularly. I was incarnated in Lemuria for thousands of lifetimes, like a very long time. Uh,
Mhm.
so it's really in my soul stream in a very central way. Um, so yeah, it's been in my awareness, in and out. I mean, she's always with me. The mountain's one of my biggest allies. I've been living here physically on this timeline in this body only about a year, so I'm still pretty fresh in that way. Um, Most of the other places I've lived were for various grid work purposes, places where I was abused, places where there was stuff to clear. Um, so before here, I was in Seattle for a couple years. There's a major branch of the Montauk projects over there.
Yeah.
I lived in New Orleans for about 10 years. That place is very close
Oh,
to my heart.
yeah.
Yeah, I was also abused there.
Mm.
I grew up in New York City, another big formative place. Um, so, yeah, those are some touchstones places.
Yeah. Brittany, have you been to Mount Shasta yet?
Not yet. I
Well,
know I'll be there with you at some point.
yeah, yeah, I'm moving there in like 6 months. So, and that was the whole reason I came out to California. So it's beautiful that the mountain is protecting and guiding you and is one of your soulmates, as it is for many of us in this lifetime. I know
Yeah.
that you work a lot with the Antareans, and that is the star, um, I'm going to call it a star system group.
Mhm.
Does that
Sure.
work?
Yeah.
A star system group. I didn't want to call them a star seed group because they are a star system group, but they are the ones that work with you most. And
Mhm.
that comes from the star that is in the Scorpion constellation, which I believe that, Brittany's definitely Scorpio rising
Mhm.
represent, but Alondra, your sun in Scorpio, correct?
Yes,
Mm.
Yeah,
also.
in this lifetime, in this timeline,
Yeah,
in
yeah.
this incarnation, because Alondra's got to make those um, demarcations every now and then because timelines in your story get a little weird,
Yeah,
and
they
so
do.
Mount Shasta's been an incredible force in my life as well. And do you believe that um, when you, let's say that there's a piece of you that's incarnated from Antares,
Mhm.
did that piece incarnate into this specific body, or did it incarnate into all of the incarnations that you've had here on this planet?
Oh,
That's in my journey, that's where I'm coming to a fork in the road and having to figure it out. It's like a
yeah.
slow etching away of the sculpture. But what
Yeah,
has the journey been like for you?
it's more the latter. It's more all of them for
Yeah.
sure. This is a core soul part. It's also a future self, so it's a future life. And that's like when I need to lean into where it is in a practical sense, that's usually what I wind up with. It's like, oh, there's my future self. So,
Yeah.
um, and it's been a part of all of my lifetimes, from beginning to end and beyond the end, and how it goes in in big spirals of evolution. But yeah, so it's been with me for a long time. Um, Surviving the Montauk Project was the catalyst for the Antareans entering my life on a more physical, literal level. They were one of the groups that was helping to stabilize the incredible distortions of time and space that were happening there. So they stepped in, and I had the chance to actually experience them on a 3D level and, here kind of face to face, like, you're one of us, you've been doing this for many lifetimes. And, I'm just like a terrified child and like, oh shit, these like really weird looking beings and like
What do they
but
look like? I don't know if I've ever heard you talk about what they look like.
oh yeah. Well, they come in different forms, and because they're of a higher dimension, they
I
can
was going
choose
to
different
ask what
vessels.
dimension do
Yeah.
they exist primarily in?
Um, well, my future self is primarily eighth dimensional, so uh it's above good and evil. It's a very peaceful, kind of stable vibration. Um, you still have good and evil going up until like the sixth dimension ish.
Yeah,
And then
right.
after that, like there's just unity consciousness. So, yeah, so they're coming from unity. And as such, they can appear to you in whatever form they deem appropriate, because our senses are just perceiving such a limited wavelength of information. So,
Right.
they could show up as anything. They could show up as a penguin if they wanted to,
Right.
but
Right.
um, so the ones I encountered at Montauk generally looked like Earth humans. Um, but when I encounter them in my meditation, frequently they look like Anubis, like jackal-headed humans or dog-headed humans.
Yeah.
So that's pretty common.
Hmm.
Also, they often look like mantids, gigantic 7 or 8 feet kind of humanoid mantid beings. So usually one of those forms are the most common ones. Yeah.
Yeah. Brittany, I just want to make sure that do you have any questions about what's happening? Because I have some previous knowledge on what he's talking about, and watched some of your previous podcasts, Alandra, and actually talked with you about some of these things. But Brittany, be kind of our ear for the
Yeah.
audience to make sure if you're like, okay, we're going into Montauk, we're going into Antares, where do we need to reel it back to?
No, I'm following, but I'm happy to be the ear from the audience that maybe curious. I think that explaining a little bit more about like Montauk and these spaces, like what brought you there, where are they? Other people, I think, especially those getting really in their consciousness and starting to see. I have a community, and just yesterday in our call, I had two people were like, I'm all of a sudden seeing these like places and I don't know where they are and I don't know what these beings are. So I
Uh-huh.
think maybe giving us a little bit more description and how maybe you found your way into that or connecting with them would be really helpful also
Sure.
to just identify.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
Brittany and I just did an episode yesterday called Attack of the Hollywood Clones.
Mm.
And I said in the episode, I was like, well, we're about to have somebody on tomorrow who's going to, shed some light on some of the wacky things that we're even bringing to the table in this conversation. But, Brittany asked about Montauk, and I want you to explain a little bit about what that is, because that also means that we do need to bring in the parallel entity. I'm just going to call it the parallel personality
Mhm.
uh, that joined you at some point, and we need to explain about that. We need to lay
Yeah,
the groundwork for it now.
yeah, for sure. Well, Montauk, first off, is a little town. It's a beach town on the eastern end of Long Island in New York, New York State, about 3 hours east of New York City. So that was the location of an Air Force intelligence project, which was Project Phoenix or Project Rainbow Bridge in different iterations. Throughout the 60s, 70s, and 80s, mostly is when people talk about it at the height of the activity. Um, So this is a secret Air Force intelligence project at a Cold War era radar base in Montauk, Long Island. So that's where it is in time and space. And my experiences there are primarily in the 1970s and 80s, um, which is a little strange because this body was born in 86. So there was a previous person, a separate body from this one, who had those experiences and then had their consciousness transferred into this body. So that's the short version. Um,
Yes, that
and
is
now
the
I'll
short version of that.
go by Alandra, and we're just working as one person now. But um,
Okay, and
yeah,
who was this? Who was this person? When were they born? When did the consciousness transfer happen? Was the consciousness transfer organic, like a soul level walk in, or was this done artificially? What happened at this time to cause this to happen?
yeah, it was hugely artificial, not an organic walk-in experience, which is much more just part of the natural order of things.
Right.
So Max was my name, and I was born in 1970 in Patchogue, Long Island, and I was brought to Montauk when I was 4, so 1974-ish, 373, 74, and survived quite a number of years of torture on the Montauk base. So this is a trauma-based mind control project, which means it's directed by Draco-reptilians and Zeta reticulans and negative aspects of the military. And the basic goal is to destroy starseeds, to utterly render them um, incapable, kill them, make them go crazy, because the people incarnating as starseeds are just inherently a threat to the established order on Earth. This is part of why we're incarnating at this time in such numbers. We're here to raise the vibration on a mass level, and we all get targeted in various ways by the
Yeah.
forces that don't want Earth to be a higher dimensional place.
Right. Right.
So, yeah, I think we're all on the same page there.
Well, I've never really heard um, about the Montauk Project being a, of course, most people wouldn't talk about this, people who don't have their own experience within the program itself, people who are just theorizing about it and posting YouTube videos about it. I've never really heard of it being discussed as a star seed eliminating agenda, which of course it is. We would probably get to that um, in our minds anyway. We would kind of understand that's where it was going, or that was one of the side effects that they enjoyed, but I never really thought about it being specifically the agenda behind it. Can you go more into that?
Yeah, that was one of the conscious intentions there. Um, on a technological level, they're using Zeta Reticulan technology mixed with a bunch of human technology that was kept secret and some other Orion technology, different things, to break down the barriers between timelines, between dimensional levels. It was also a technological project to advance the capacities of Air Force intelligence in particular in the
Hmm.
US. But yeah, but the but all the children that were used, so it was mostly children used for this project, um, against their will, that were taken from their families by various means. My mother had a contract with an Air Force colonel, like, so I was literally basically bought essentially,
Yeah,
by the Air Force. Some of the other kids were simply abducted or had other situations where they wound up there. But yeah, part of the reason they were using kids is because they wanted to train super soldiers who were able to navigate the dimensional levels and navigate the different timelines, as sort of a second nature thing, because they would have been doing it from childhood. And also to be in service to the Draco and the Satanists, and to have that kind of loyalty, you have to be broken into different personalities at a young age. Um, so this is sort of in line with other similar projects around the world. And they're all basically, yeah, they're starseed inhibitors.
and what are
Uh,
some of the ways that they do that? Because I know Montauk Project, there was time travel, there
mhm.
was dimensional travel, going into certain places and going into certain times and actually being there physically, like being
Mhm.
hooked up to machines or kind of
Yeah,
1970s, 80s looking machines,
yeah.
but actually time traveling and going to these places and then being coming back, and there being this period of time when you come back. There's this 20-year period people talk about where
Mhm.
they're gone for 20 years and they come back and there's all this mental stuff they have to go through. I mean, there's
Yeah.
a lot of information about the Montauk Project out there. So we know some of those things. It feels very secret space program. It feels very deep military, black ops military, but you
Mhm.
don't ever hear it talked about as a specific tool to inhibit star seeds from waking up or
Mhm.
for knowing their power. So, what are some of the
Yeah.
ways that that occurred?
Yeah, well, that's one of the broader purposes of the secret space programs in general. So these programs are quite extensive. Even the Montauk Project itself has branched off into at least a dozen projects that I'm aware of. It's still very, very active in the present and always expanding, and it's tied into a gigantic infrastructure, essentially controlled by the Draco Empire, which extends into places below the Earth and off planet. It's like a
Right.
very large system. Um, Most of us in the secret space programs have served on Mars and on the moon and other places in the solar system and outside of the solar system.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, and some of those places are open slave societies. Like they know they're being controlled by the Draco. It's not a secret like it is on Earth.
Right.
Um, so
Why
yeah.
do you believe, Alondra? Why do you? Because Brittany and I have talked about this. I have my theories and I have all of my explanations for why everything is hidden in plain sight and why
Mhm.
there so many of them are underground and in Antarctica, and they're not. They're letting us appear to live free in our terrarium up here, right?
Yeah.
That's sort of what's happening here. But why aren't they just ruling everything, and why aren't they just coming out and enslaving us with our knowledge? And I tell people all the time, there's a consciousness reason for that.
Mhm.
There's a sort more loosh that can be produced by the idea that something is secretly controlling us. I mean, there's lots of things Spirit has told me, but what is your perspective on that?
Yeah. Um, Well, I don't have a complete answer, and all of our individual answers, I'm sure, have their truth to them. So I just want to say that first. Um, what I understand is that um, free will is something, it's a force that is too big to fight, essentially. So they basically don't have the power to openly enslave Earth. Like they just can't do it. So they don't have the numbers,
Love it.
they don't have the physical ability to do it. So they do this because they have to, essentially. You know, obviously they're not doing it out of the goodness of their heart. So um, they're very weak in this solar system. I mean, they're Earth is a very unusual circumstance because the big wars between essentially the Lyrans and the Draco, like the big intergalactic wars that were going on for some thousands of years, like those are mostly resolved. Like they're basically over in
Yeah.
most of the places that have been fought over. Um, it's all been said and done. But Earth is sort of in this weird position where we're stuck in the past in many respects. We're really behind the present moment, and we're still being enslaved as if the war was still going on. But it's not actually going on a mass scale. It's just going on for us. So um, yeah, so they don't even like the Draco don't have the resources in our solar system to fully enslave us, like because their resources are very thin. I mean, they were mostly defeated in this area of the galaxy. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And they are possessed, if you will, by archontic mind parasite energy. So there's that force there that,
Yeah.
like in Stranger Things, which I've been watching Stranger Things again,
Hmm.
simply because Spirit called me to. And when I did, I saw that they blatantly put in the show MK Ultra, MK Ultra, all means all these things that I never noticed before 8 years ago when I watched it. And
Yeah.
there are these creatures there, these reptilian like demogorgons is what they call them. But then there's this mind flayer, this big black thing with tentacles that moves through the air. And I'm like, that's the Archon, and that's what's inside of those Demogorgons. So I
Yeah.
just want everyone to be listening. This can sound really Stranger Things and really Star Trek when we get into it, but I just wanted people to understand that the Alpha Draconians that we're talking about, the Draco, these are the shape-shifting reptilian beings, the 7 to 9 foot tall, long-tailed beings, depending on their hierarchical status, that can shapeshift, that are a part of the main Illuminati organization, satanic ritual abuse cults all across the world, and that the Zeta Reticuli that we've been talking about are the small grays, which not all of them, but many of them are a sort of Borg hive mind species that work for the Draco. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Or are enslaved by them, if you will, even though they're sort of artificially intelligent?
Hmm.
Yeah. So I just want to make sure people, when they're hearing these words, that we are explaining some of this. So, Alondra, so we have this lifetime as Max where we're in the Montauk Project. We're experiencing all of this governmental secret society control programs, experiments being done. Now, how did the consciousness transfer happen? Because Alondra was already born by the time. So take us into that moment and then take us into the current timeline that you're in.
Yeah. Uh, well, this body was about three, so it's 1989 or so. Well, there are different entry points. So also there are partial transfers along the way. So um, there something they can do is, or I mean, this happens with walk-ins as well on the organic level. Um, is you don't necessarily transfer the consciousness all at once. Sometimes it comes in packets. So um, so there's one in 1989, excuse me, and then a bigger one in 1993, which was when it was kind of finalized and we really became one person.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So Max at that time, um, I'm still recovering a lot of memories from his later life. His early life is more clear. Um, at one point, the Zeta Reticulans faked his death, and so he was able to get out of Camp Hero itself, the Montauk base.
Yeah.
But then he was being used by the Zeta Reticuli-ans for some time after that. And I believe they were the ones primarily who facilitated the process of moving him into this body. So this person, Alandra, birth name was Alan. I was born into a satanic cult family in New York City, so still in a very mind-controlled context. In some ways, a lot worse than Max's background because Max didn't come from a satanic family. He was brought into it, when he was already grown to be a child. Um, but this body was abused from before birth and during the birth process and directly after birth. So I had a much more traumatic birth experience and infancy experience in this body. Um,
Alondra, I'm so sorry to interrupt because we're going into some intense topics here, but I just want to kind of get your take on, do you think that this consciousness transfer was done on purpose into this exact body
Absolutely.
because the plan for you was already in place
Yes.
and the fracturing of the consciousness was already a norm, and was it going to be expected? And so do you think that someone can be consciously transferred more easily if there is psychological dissociative trauma?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Um, I mean, the more dissociated you are from your mind and body, the less direct influence your soul has over your trajectory. So,
Yeah.
yeah, yes, definitely.
I think one of the other questions that's coming up that I'm hearing like listeners kind of leaning in and asking is, so are we, how can I say this to make this maybe clear the question? Both of these beings, humans, as we're talking about, you're basically living parallel, correct?
Mhm.
So that's why I just want to like clear because I got already hear people like, so wait, is this person, did they just die when your consciousness got taken? Are they still living? Are you both living at the same time? Like just to bring in a little bit more, because I know the three of us here could sit and powwow on all sorts of different
Right.
dimensions. But for those just listening, maybe just a little bit of an explanation too of, because I hear you saying his later life, right? So this is parallel happening. This isn't a
Yeah,
like this happened, that person is now deceased, and
yeah,
now this is over here.
yeah, yeah, it's parallel. I have tuned into aspects of Max that are still having a separate experience now in 2025.
So
Basically,
Max is still living in our timeline in this incarnation,
I don't think it's on this timeline. I think it's
I
on a
think.
different timeline.
Got
Yeah,
it. Yeah, I'm
yeah.
like, whoa. I never caught that before. Thank you, Brittany, because I assumed that Max passed away or was, the body was done something with. I hate to say it like that, but that's how they look at it.
Yeah.
But the body was done something with, but the consciousness was taken. So there was no continued life for Max. This is going to blow some people's mind, not Brittany or myself, but a lot of people out there who tend to look at soul or consciousness as little bubbles or clumps of matter, the way that they look at their body. And they don't realize that, a radio station, a song can be picked up by 1,000 radio stations without taking anything away from the song. So,
Mhm.
and the consciousness is much more of a frequency that can be divided or received by,
Correct.
so, yeah. So I just want to make sure because it's getting it can be complicated that we're
Yeah.
And I
talking about how this happens as well.
Right. And I want you to lean back into that. I want to just say this too for listeners who are listening and maybe you're starting to get curious and be like, I want to know more about this whole parallel thing because parallel dimensions and lives and all of that can really start to stretch you into seeing and feeling and thinking a lot of things you may have never experienced. So, quantum physicists have there's a study where they had studied like how many parallel versions of yourself are consciously moving through time space dimension, and 27 is the last number that I heard that they had counted.
Yeah. And
So
that's what they can measure, or that's what
that's
they
right.
can
That's
quantify.
what we can measure it now. And so, when I talk about this with anyone, I'm like, we use terms like our highest self or this version or whatever. And I'm like, you do realize that when you hear people saying that version's already created, it's already doing that thing, it quite literally is.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
just going to leave that nugget and seed there. I want us to dive back into this, but
Yeah,
do research.
we've got our probable, realities that we're living simultaneously. We have the probabilities, we have the actual realities that are running simultaneously. And then we have actual artificial consciousness transfers that happen where we take little bits of your light wattage and we put it into another vessel on purpose, knowing what that vessel was going to go through, not knowing that that vessel's soul would eventually come through with an awakening and dismantle it from within. But from the beginning, it was designed, yeah, exactly. It was designed for
Period.
the purpose of like, well, this is the path of least resistance. So, because people will question, well, Alondra, Max went through an insane experience that deserves a trilogy movie around it, and then gets transferred into another body that's already going through another movie.
Hmm.
Wait, I mean, I just want to make sure people understand where this is going. So, when the consciousness transfer fully locked in for you, what was happening for you in life as Alan or as the Alondra that you are now?
Yeah,
Take us back to the beginning for you, because I know you said you were in a multi-generational satanic family.
I
And
am. I was. Yeah.
yes, so let's go into that piece. And because now the consciousness transfer is happening. You're born in 1986.
Hmm.
Max is still alive in that incarnation, still running, working with Montauk and Zeta Reticulans.
Hmm.
But now, as you're starting to get older, around 3 years old, and even older than that, that consciousness is being artificially put in here.
Hmm.
And so, take us back to that time.
Sure. Uh, well, the first fragment came in when I was, yeah, about two and a half, three, and I was still, um, that's not a time when you form a lot of conscious memories. So, my impressions of it are, um, pretty vague. I do have a sense, of something coming into me, and it's like, oh, this thing is not me, but I also couldn't do anything about it. But I was kind of used to that because in this body, even at three or two and a half, I had already been, um, I'd had Draco inside my mind on a daily basis, for as long as I was conscious. So I was sort of used to sharing my body space with consciousness that was not mine. Um,
So when you say you were sharing your mind with Draco, is this done through some type of ritual? Was this done?
yeah. Um, well, sometimes it's in a
'Cause I've never
ritualist.
heard you say that before, and that very piques my interest.
Oh, yeah. Well, I was being shot out of my body in other ways as well. They would move my mind into clone bodies, and then it would come back into this body. Um, but the early versions of that technology in the 80s, they could only keep your mind in a clone body for a short amount of time. Like I recall in the early times, it was like only 15 or 20 minutes that they could keep you in the other body. Now it's gotten to the point where they can keep you there for whole days, and like it's an entirely start and anyway, that I don't need to get into that
Well,
specifically.
that's sort of what we were talking about yesterday in our podcast. It's not
Yeah,
sort of, but that's why I mentioned you yesterday was you were going to shed some light on, because when people hear cloning and consciousness transfer, it sounds too out there for them. It's good to hear from your perspective how that was operating, because people don't understand how the Hillary Clinton we're looking at right now could be a 2 week old clone that's only going to last for a few more days with her consciousness in it, and she's
yeah,
in Tahiti somewhere or in the moon, breaking up rocks with a who knows what they're what they've got them doing.
yeah.
Seriously, I've talked to other people, and you have people who are being cloned, and the original is off, squaring up some contract somewhere or doing some type of slave work or just insanity. So it's okay that those things come up. And so, even as a child, your consciousness through trauma, because that's how they do it, is through trauma,
Mhm.
were dislodging you, creating different personalities within you, but also dislodging you and putting you into different places. Was this part of an experiment, or was this part of infesting you with some type of reptilian
It's both.
entity?
So yeah, it's ritualistic and religious, and it's also very scientific and practical. So it, both right and left brain approaches at the same time. Um, so uh, I probably hadn't spent very much of those 2.5 years like fully in my body at that time. I was very used to dissociating, moving around. I had different Draco who would essentially take over my body for certain periods and live through my body, experience what I experienced through my senses. Particularly if I was out in a clone, then they could just literally use my body to keep doing whatever I was doing, and experience it for themselves. So a lot of parties were having the experience of this body, of this person. Um, yeah, but when Max came in, it was really different. I mean, I could sense that his intentions were basically positive. Um, also you get your intuition really heightened through this process, because you sort of have to survive. Like if you don't really get into your intuition, then you go insane or you die, or there's just no other way to move forward. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I would have a really strong sense of the intention of different beings, and so Max was coming in, and I could feel he was in pain and confusion, but basically a good person. And it's like, oh, okay. So just that was, so there was an aspect of it that was very warm and kind of reassuring. And I was like, oh, okay, like this is a person that I actually could share my body with, without it being a big abuse
Right.
scenario. Like
Right.
maybe so we kind of talk to each other outside of the body, because the soul is not necessarily bound to the age of the body. So we could have conversations outside of the body like adult people, even when the body was 2 or 3. So
Yeah.
yeah, so I would talk to Max, and he told me a little bit of his story, and basically told me he'd be coming in, and he didn't have anywhere else to go, and they were making him go. And so I sort of, the basics of it were made clear to my mind via my soul at that time. Um, and the external circumstances, for the first uh, packet, the first transfer experience, were very clinical. Um, I was in some sort of underground base. I think it was in Nyack, New York, actually, a little bit upstate New York. I've been getting more specific on some of the locations lately. Yeah, a lot of these things happen in the New York City area and also upstate New York, and Long Island. So, um, yeah.
Why
So,
is that?
uh, well, um, this is another can of worms, but Atlantis was located off the eastern coast of the U.S. So the whole eastern seaboard. I mean, that's why the country was founded in the place that it was founded in, um, because of the Atlantean energy and the proximity,
Right.
to it. And yeah, there's a lot of Atlantean infrastructure that's submerged, like just off the east coast and in the Caribbean. And the forces in power are still using that energy. They're still using that technology to feed into their present creations.
Mhm.
So, yeah, so New York and Montauk in particular are Atlantean power sites, that with a very long, millennia long historical connection to the main continent of Atlantis. Yeah, so
Wow.
that's the basic reason.
Yeah. And well, and it's important that we bring that up because like I have a retreat coming up in Hawaii on Imbolc, and I'm specifically was drawn to do that because of the location that it's on and because of the type of satanic rituals that will be happening on those cross-quarter dates across the world. We'll
Mhm.
be counteracting that frequency. So it's
Yay.
it's important that we go to these sacred sites and we go to these different locations. But just as Brittany and I were talking about yesterday, they like to go to those sacred sites. The Illuminati, the Draco, because they go to the power source. Just like the number 13, so sacred, taps us out of the matrix. That's why they love it so much.
Yeah.
Gold, so high vibrating, so nourishing. That's why they want all of the gold for themselves. They like to go to the areas where the high vibrating power is. We were just talking about Mount Shasta yesterday. Brittany said if they were going to put a siphoning device anywhere, you'd want it to be in Mount Shasta, and there are.
Yeah.
I have felt it. I felt the archon energies around Mount Shasta.
Yeah.
It's a whirlpool of
Mhm.
energy that's funneling in and out of there. So take us into um, because the Montauk Project deserves its own episode at some point, and we should revisit that. But take us a little bit back into what your experience was like with your mom and your family and growing up, and
Yeah.
what was happening for you in the cult. That's what I'm going to call it, that you were basically
Yeah.
bred into.
Yeah, it's a cult. They're usually Satanists or Luciferians explicitly. Um,
What's the difference, Alondra? I mean, I have what I believe to be the difference, but share what the difference between Satanism or Saturnism is and Luciferianism and how they work together or operate together.
there's a tremendous amount of overlap. I mean, they're essentially the same thing. The distinctions are pretty subtle, for me as as someone not invested in it. But
Right.
um, growing up, the main distinction for me was that I associated the Luciferian title with the more old European kind of branches of it, and I associated the Satanist title with the U.S. and Canada kind of New World aspects of it.
Got it. Yeah.
And there's a bit of a cultural divide. Um, the Luciferians are much more kind of controlled, and the Satanists really revel in just total chaos and
Right.
destruction of the mind. And yeah, so obviously the CIA being the main satanic organization in the US, they're much more on the satanic than the Luciferian side.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Luciferians are also much older historically, and they're more tied in with the various secret societies. And um, so yeah, so they're kind of the
Yes, that
same
helps
thing.
me. You're helping me kind of see the difference. I know that Luciferians often will um, worship Venus and her five-pointed
Yeah,
um, journey through the solar system,
yeah.
and that there's a difference there as well. But a lot of people will hear these terms, and I'm wanting to Luciferian feels much more Kabbalistic or old when it
Hmm.
comes to ancient, and
Yeah,
these Satanists or Saturnists are a little bit more of a new world
Mhm.
order agenda. And so because there's so much overlapping happening, but these terms are still being used so much
yeah,
that it's hard to navigate, what sects that we're talking about. And so I just wanted to delineate.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I've experienced that five-pointed goddess thing, the Masonic logo with the 5 points of different colors, like that's the goddess worship thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm with you there. Um, Yeah, the like in my early life, I went to a private school that was much more of a Luciferian kind of school. It was run by this really ancient Russian lady who was a Luciferian, and she wanted like our schoolwork included all these like sort of fancy Western European um, things. Like we learned to play chess and we learned about Greek and Roman history, and it was very like, oh, okay, it's like very European kind of feeling.
Yeah.
Um, and that was, yeah, it was more of a Luciferian vibe. Um,
So you were actually sent to schools in your,
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah. So the school that I went to as a young child was called the East Manhattan School, private school. It was, this is not a secret place. This is an above ground place. Um, the other kids went there. I'm still friendly with some of them. They're mostly not from cult families. Like it was mostly um, they brought a lot of normal kids in there as well. So um, the school
so
no
they
longer
let
exists.
you, so what, everything that was happening to you, they still let you go exist with people who were just living normal childhoods and
Yeah,
having a school. Can you explain about that and
yeah.
what you call that? I think it's a front life is what you call it.
Yeah, I've said front life and back life pretty frequently. I got that from other DID survivors. It wasn't original to me, but I've used it a lot. Um, yeah, so some slaves are kept as slaves their whole lives, and others have a split life, and I had a split life. Um, I think, obviously, for those survivors who have gone public, it's much more common for us to have a split life. If you're enslaved for the whole thing, you don't get to, talk on YouTube and stuff. You just have your whole life in the cult and military context. That was the case with my brother. I had a twin brother. And as far as I know, he never received a birth certificate or a social security number. Like he was just kept underground for his entire life. And I don't know what documents he used or whatever, but I had a split life from an early age, so I'd be abused in a cult context at night, and I would go to a normal school in the day. Um, yeah, it's quite
And
the
they were
mind
able to
swap.
create this split within you. They didn't even have to worry about you saying anything because they could take memories away, or they could, um, you know, these different alter is what they're called, alters,
Yeah.
these different alternate aspects of self in the dissociative identity world.
Mhm.
They will take over and they don't remember everything that the other ones are doing, and they keep them separate like that.
Yeah.
What are
Yeah, the
some of the
aspect.
ways that they made that happen, if it's okay if we talk about that?
Yeah, yeah, this is fine. Um, So the aspects of me that were conscious at school would be completely compartmentalized, separate, and not aware of the parts that would be going through the abuse. They wouldn't really know about each other so much. So these are full-blown alternate personalities. This is dissociative identity disorder, what used to be called multiple personality disorder. Um, it's most extreme when the parts are not aware of each other. So that's when you're missing time and you're not co-conscious. Um, when you start getting co-conscious, obviously, then you start remembering things that could get you in trouble. So I had a very strict discipline training from birth in this body to have totally separate selves for my public life and my cult life. So even by the time I was forming memories, around 3 or 4, forming memories consistently, even by then the programming was totally unshakable. So it wasn't something I had to consciously think about. It's like, oh, now I'm going to pretend that I don't remember. Like, there was no conscious processing whatsoever. It's totally unconscious. Yeah.
So
Wow.
how is something like this, again, curious minds listening, how is something like this programmed?
Yeah. Mostly brutal torture, primarily sexual assault, but also many other kinds of physical torture. So when you're in a situation where you're completely helpless, to stop yourself from being harmed, you dissociate. That's the basic kind of mechanism of survival for people to survive things. Anybody who's had a car accident or had military service, like in the normal military, this will be kind of familiar. And often you'll forget things about the event. Like, it's pretty common if you have a big car accident, it's like, oh, I don't remember anything the day after, and then gradually you go to therapy, you do your EMDR, whatever you're doing, and you get fragments of the event back. So it's very similar for ritual abuse, but it's more extreme because it's so intentional and systematic. Um, so generally usually rape and torture, um, having to kill other people or see other people killed, is very common. And the terror and the shame and the other extreme feelings that come with that, are harnessed, by a perpetrator who's called a programmer usually, and they basically, um, coach you to channel all those energies into a separate aspect of yourself to compartmentalize them. So, like if they force you to kill someone, you have extreme guilt and shame and fear. They're like, okay, but that's not your guilt and shame and fear. It belongs to, and they give you another name. Like that belongs to Jonathan. Jonathan did that. You didn't do that, right? And like you have to preserve your ego and your mind in some way, so it's like, oh, okay, like you're off the hook, like Jonathan did it, it was him, and so this other part of you forms. Yeah.
So these programmers, would you also call them handlers, or were those different people?
Yeah, those are both valid names. We're still, this is very early in the process of disclosure, so I'm sure as more survivors come forward, and especially as more perpetrators come forward, we'll get more specific language around all of this stuff,
Yeah.
but yeah, those are mostly interchangeable.
Would you say that all of the mind control that was being done on you, the ritual abuse, there was this satanic, saturnic, almost religious ceremonial aspect of it, but were
Yeah.
they using specifically MK Ultra mind control, like Monarch programming, beta sex kitten programming, things like that? Is
Yeah.
that is it all coming from the same place?
Uh, as a blanket statement, yes, it is. Yeah. So MK Ultra, just like Montauk, is still going today. It's branched off into many, many dozens of other projects that are still continuing. Um, so, and I'm sure a lot of the names will be coming out in the coming years. Yeah, so we don't have to call everything MK Ultra because that was properly in the 70s and
Right.
officially was discontinued, and now we have all these other projects. But it's a similar idea. Yeah. So again, they're both religious Satanists and military scientists at the same time. Um, this fusion of government workers with Satanists is relatively new. It's only the last couple generations. The Satanists have been fragmenting people since ancient times,
Right.
breaking them up into different personalities. But really, it was the foundation of the CIA that accelerated all of this. And the CIA is an explicitly satanic organization.
Yeah.
They were created officially to bring the satanic religion into the U.S. government and to make it part of U.S. government policy and procedure. Like that was the actual purpose of the CIA. Yeah. Um, and the people that founded it are Draco hybrids and religious Satanists. Um, yeah. So at least since 1948, there's been this close collaboration between the U.S. government and the Satanists, and before that in some ways, but there was a little more separation before that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, what was the entire? I know in these satanic ritual cults that there are different roles. I'm not sure what to call them, different stations or in the hierarchy.
hmm
And yours was specifically to be a breeder, correct?
Yeah, that was the one of the big things. I was also being trained to be a programmer. So, that's what I would be doing if I had stayed in the cult.
They did this specifically because your mother's bloodline, your bloodline, but your family that you came from genetically belongs to a specific bloodline that they're
Mhm.
invested in.
Yeah, sounds like you've seen some other interviews. Yeah.
Well, I also know a lot about the satanic ritual cult world, but yes, I'm wanting people to understand like why Alandra, why these people in New York, why his family, you know?
Yeah. Yes, they're very interested in my bloodline. I'm a blood relative of Jesus. So Jesus and his wife Magdalene had a very large family in the south of France and then went to all sorts of other places. And there are many, many thousands of us at this point, but they're especially interested in anybody related to him, and
Why
anybody
is that?
related bloodlines. Um, I don't fully understand it, but um, I mean, his bloodline was chosen by some of the higher beings because it was the most aligned, the most amenable to some of the light technologies that the higher beings wanted to use. So basically, a good fit for the sort of technology that they wanted to use to liberate Earth, um, is the
And
short
how does
version.
this bloodline play into the other bloodlines that we so notoriously hear about? You know, the
Yeah,
Rothschilds, the
yeah.
Rockefellers.
Um, it's it's basically in the simplest terms. I mean, it's how the degree of interest of the Satanists is directly related to how easy those bloodlines are to hybridize with Draco DNA. So that's kind of the basic thing.
Mm.
Yeah, because some humans will survive genetic alteration better than others. Some humans will integrate the genetic material better than others. So those are the ones that are especially targeted. Yeah.
So the hybrids you're talking about, um, because 2 years ago I did a shamanic activation as a client, as a participant, not as the facilitator. And when they did this activation around calling in your healer archetype, I thought it was going to be shaman, medicine woman, whatever. But it came through as a king. And they put a crown on my head and they said, "You're a king." And I had no idea this was 2 years ago where all this was going. And I said, "Where's my healer archetype?" And all the woman, she almost looked like Joan of Arc, all the woman said to me was, "You're here to restore the bloodlines on this planet." And I
Yeah.
was like, bloodlines. And immediately I thought of Rockefellers and Rothschilds. And I was like, no, we are not going down that rabbit hole, is what I said 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So obviously, some of us have come here to address the bloodline issue. And
Hmm.
from what I'm hearing from you, that when you say reptilian hybrids, I automatically think of some half human, half reptilian being that is born. I never
Hmm.
thought about it being this transfer or this almost possession that
Hmm.
takes over. I never thought about it that way because I have come in contact with someone who I believe is a hybrid reptilian. And I know that I could technically call you that, okay?
Yeah. Yeah.
But this person was not in alignment with me, okay, and showed themselves to me and shape shifted in front of me.
Hmm.
And it was a little frightening. And so there was, again, that was 2 years ago. There was another clue in my journey around like, we need you to look over here. We need you to look over here. Like the reptilian thing I had been avoiding for 10 years. It was always put in the room over there. That's not where Chrys goes because he's a healer and he just doesn't go down those rabbit holes. I was, I'm going to say, forced or coerced by my soul to constantly be looking in that direction. And so, from what you're telling me, is these children, let's say it's George W. Bush, he could be a reptilian hybrid because not only is his father a shape-shifting reptilian, allegedly. Okay, I'm looking at everybody out there in
Air quotes.
in the World Wide Web. We're just crazy people doing a podcast. Okay, um, but he could have been human, but a reptilian entity or energy siphoned, took over, possessed, or almost became a part of him in some way, almost like a virus can become a part of you. I mean, I'm trying to understand kind of how that works.
Yeah. Uh, well, on a practical level, if anybody wants to learn about Bush and Reagan and those folks, I definitely recommend Kathy O'Brien's memoir.
We
Um,
mentioned her yesterday on
yeah.
the
Okay.
podcast. So yes.
Yeah.
And Alondra, what do you think now that you brought Kathy up? I saw a documentary recently with her, and she talked about George Bush Sr. doing his shape shifting into a reptilian thing, and she said she believes it's some kind of holographic mind control thing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I couldn't tell if she was saying that just so that people took the documentary more seriously, because I was like, but why would you bring it up at all?
Hmm.
Um, or is it possible that she just believes that because she can't wrap her mind around how they are shape shifting? What are
I
your thoughts
I
on that?
think it's more the latter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that she believes they've done so many crazy things with my mind that they can make me see something like that.
Hmm.
When thousands of people have come forward and said, the Queen of England, I've seen her shapeshift, like that would have
Yeah.
been crazy to me at one time until I saw the woman's face right in front of mine shapeshift before she got into child's pose and did this little snaky thing to let me know you saw what you saw and then gaslit me from that point forward on. What are you talking about? So I couldn't tell if I was dealing with a full shapeshifter. I didn't feel like I was, but I felt like this person either is possessed or there's a hybrid thing happening here.
Hmm.
So, and I'm very curious about how that works and how that happens because I
Yeah.
just assumed if you're a reptilian hybrid, you were from birth. I didn't know that it was something that they would mix with you and it would slowly take over.
Hmm.
That's
Yeah.
newer for me.
Yeah, there's a lot of mixing. It's honestly pretty standard in many parts of the secret space programs to receive injections of Draco DNA at a young age. So
Alondra, I'm just gonna we have to be really careful about this one, and I'm gonna use a V word, or I'm not gonna use a V word. Okay,
okay.
let's just say that something was put in you, and everybody's going and doing it. It's the latest fad. We're all doing it. They're all saying we should do it.
Mhm.
Let's say that there's serpent venom. I'm trying to be very careful about what I say. Okay. Let's say that there's snake venom in this thing that they're
Mhm.
putting into people.
Yeah,
Would that also be a way that they are implanting reptilian DNA?
absolutely. Hmm.
Oh my God. So basically, what they're trying to do, ugh, I'm like, I don't want to get the whole podcast taken down.
I was about to say
Um,
I could say so much on this right now, and I'm just like,
yeah, same.
Well, because now what I'm starting to get the idea of is we've got to put it in their body because we want that we all have a reptilian brain, but this almost reptilian consciousness. Like, let's say that you could trap the reptilian alpha draconian consciousness into a bacteria, but I actually mean a V word.
mm-hmm,
Let's say you're
mm-hmm.
able to do that and then you inject that into the whole population, then you don't even need to worry about the parasites in their body that are connected to the moon controlling their personality. You actually have an exact controlling mechanism that would make someone resonate more with an alpha draconian hierarchical celebrity worship
Mhm.
ceremony more than someone coming forward and saying, "Don't you want to think for yourself?" or "What's in that food that you're eating?" It no longer will resonate anymore.
Yeah.
And I'm sure this has, no correlation with the amount of venom that has been pushed into human beings more and more and more every
Well,
single year.
Brittany, did you know that the VIR, that word actually means venom?
Hmm. I
I
did know that.
just learned that. Okay, so from Alandra, what you're giving me is this understanding that you can be fully human, even from like a lineage perspective. You could be almost fully Lyran or be a combination of many different humanoid races and not have any reptilian DNA in you already, but they can come in and infest from within and shift the DNA.
Mhm.
Um, hmm, I'm like, is that a word I should be using?
Well, there have been shifts, which with, the last Venom was talked about. This is a shift in your DNA. It will shift the structure of everything happening in our vessel. That to me was the first one that I was like, well, because I'm in the same, it's always interesting that it's always in front of our faces, right? I'm like, well, now we're just coming out with letting everyone know that you're basically shifting your
Ugh.
structure.
On a DNA level, yes, I think it's blocking the DNA from receiving more light and so that the other 10 strands don't turn on.
Hmm.
But there's also this venom aspect that is important to talk about. And Alondra, in your time as a young person, as a child growing up, what was it? What were some of the things that they trained you to do as a breeder and a programmer? Because I know you've been all over the world in that training,
Yeah.
because there's different levels. But when you're being trained to be a breeder, that gives you a lot more access to what's happening. Tell us some of the people that you encounter if you're comfortable. I'm just wanting people to understand
Yeah.
what's actually happening out there.
Yeah.
The 80s, the Bush Reagan era, the Clintons, the Obamas, the Trumps of it all. I know that they're not all shape-shifting reptilians and they're not all hybrids in the same way. Some of them are clones. It's a fucking fun house. That's what it is.
It
Okay.
is a it's
But
a
tell us
it's
about what your experience before we go, what your experience was like as a breeder or being bred as a breeder and where you were taken and how you got out.
Yeah. Um, well, when you're being raised to be a breeder, you're sexualized from infancy. So you're going to go through even more sexual torture than a normal cult child would. They basically want your basic instincts, including your survival instincts, to be associated with your sexuality. And prepubescence, obviously with other people's sexuality, you want to associate sex with just the ability to breathe, the ability to continue living, the any thought you have, like they try to get it connected to sexuality in some way. So yeah, you're hypersexualized, used as a sex slave, again from infancy, trafficked to usually paying clients to rape you and do other things with you. So that this is so normal that basically like you can't imagine life without some sort of sexual assault. Like it's just part of how your life is all the
And
time.
these are
So
not just your average clients, correct? Like, I'm sure there were people that you may not recognize, but there were also police officers,
yeah,
politicians, uh,
yes, yes, a lot of people
actors,
with power.
celebrities.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, yeah, a lot of people with power, a lot of people working full-time as handlers, but also in respected positions like a deacon of the Catholic Church, or yeah, New York City, you know police sergeant, or different things like this. People in positions of power, politicians, yes, everything you're naming would come through. I mean, those who are chosen for the role by the cult, who usually do have a lot of social power in different ways. Yeah. So it's true. It wouldn't just be average people. It would have to be people with a high degree of intentionality, usually men, sometimes women, imprinting basically generations of sexual torture onto you. So,
Mm,
there's a huge cumulative energy component to this,
totally.
going back many generations. And the intention is that the infant feels, all of that pain and torture going back many, many generations in their own body and become part of a collective consciousness in a way.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Um, so that's what happened to me. Because yeah, I was going to be used as a breeder, and um, they
And so,
tried to.
oh yeah,
Oh,
go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't, it cut out, so I didn't hear what you were saying. Go ahead.
yeah. So they tried to induce puberty as early as possible. This is another thing that they're doing to the general population. They're putting additives into the food supply and other places to make children go through puberty earlier, and culturally trying to sexualize children more.
Yeah.
It's very much part of the mainstream culture at this point, and we see puberty getting earlier. Anyway, in my case, I was about 12, and essentially, as soon as I could impregnate someone, that's immediately what I was doing. So, um, yeah, and I was on many different drugs to keep up my sexual performance and keep me in an altered state of consciousness. And I was forced to rape or be raped, whatever the terms are, with uh, many, many women from around the world,
And
especially
this is
from
not
12.
exclusive to you. This is something that's happening all around the world in this
Yeah,
cult. Because when people hear cult, they're going to think, oh, someplace in Idaho that has a little hut they're running out of. When this is an entire planetary, like the people behind the United Nations are the ones who are behind this cult. This isn't some Charles Manson weird off the grid thing that's happening. It is the grid.
yeah, yeah. This is the backbone of Western civilization. So, yeah,
So, what was your experience before we go with places like the Twin Towers or Belgium or, gosh, Epstein Island? Because I did hear that on one of your podcasts, but
yeah,
and it was when you
yeah.
were talking about seeing reptilian beings. Because this is something that really interests people. We're all on board with you. We all know Jay-Z and Diddy and all them. They're going down. Epstein went down. We know they're puppets, but the general population's like, yeah, something weird's going on here. There's some tunnels and some islands. I don't
Yeah.
think they realize how weird it actually is.
Hmm.
So, because you have firsthand experience, I just wanted you to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. Um, Yeah, Annika brought up Epstein in a recent interview, and it really caught me off guard. I was like, oh, I wasn't going to go there and name names, but then we named names, and it turned out to be okay. So
Yeah.
I'm,
And I wondered sometimes, I'm like, I don't know if I could sleep at night sometimes, being in your situation, unless you've got, spirit letting you know that it's okay and that you're protected. And because sometimes I've been like, wow, this is a lot to come out with, whether you felt like they would do anything about it or not. It was a lot to just be vulnerable and share.
yeah, it's time for it. I mean, we're able to talk about so many more things than we could, 5 or 10 years ago.
Yeah,
Things that would have gotten you killed, like you can literally just say on a YouTube video now. So I mean,
I know. I wonder that a lot.
Yeah, the whole matrix is breaking down. It's every day it's a little bit safer for survivors to come out, So I really appreciate that process.
Yeah, me too.
Um, yeah. Um, yeah, I was brought all over the world. Had a lot of different yeah, a lot of different sexual experiences, different cities, different places underground, different places off planet, being bred also with some non-humans. So I left that part out of the Annika interview.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, her
um,
interview definitely felt a little bit more, I'm just gonna say 3D or
yeah,
more yeah, like we're gonna keep this about the survivors and the satanic ritual abuse that's happening.
yeah.
Just like this woman I saw, she was outside of the Windsor Castle in London and she was doing a satanic ritual abuse like for the street for everyone to hear with a microphone.
Yeah,
And
she's
she
an
had their
archer.
attention and then about 30 minutes in she was like they are not human, they're shape-shifting reptilians and you could see people starting to walk away.
Yeah.
So, I mean, she had them, but then she brought up shape-shifting reptilians, and you described seeing them on Epstein Island. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
yeah, that's true, among other places.
Can you tell us a little bit about them? People are very interested in them because
About the shapeshifters, you mean?
shapeshifters in general, sure, but definitely these Draco reptilians that
Oh,
you've come in contact with. Because when people hear that I saw someone shapeshift, that's one thing, but to actually work with them as a breeder or someone in training and
hmm
be in these locations that are now coming out, it's all over the news,
hmm
but to find out it wasn't just Epstein on that island is
hmm
very important so people understand what is happening.
Yeah. Um, uh, First off, I'm gonna have to wrap up pretty soon,
Sure.
unfortunately. Although I'm also really enjoying this. Um,
Yeah, we'll have you back on.
okay.
Yes.
Yeah, so a lot of these people who run the sex trafficking networks have been hybridized. And so there are a lot of, at this point, people who can shapeshift partially or to various degrees. There's a lot of middle ground. So, and there's less and less distinction as they get more desperate between kind of the pure blood Draco and the hybrid humans. And, it's all kind of becoming one thing, which is pretty new. I mean, they kept their bloodline pretty separate from the humans for millennia. And now they're like trying to make everybody into a Draco. And so I've seen people who are not at all Draco by birth, but who received shots and were manipulated into it, have the ability to shapeshift later in life. So, it's like these are full human people, but they were just manipulated.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so it gets very muddy. Um, but yeah, Epstein Island is a great place to talk about. I'm still hoping, that guest list is made public because it's
Yeah.
just it's just a who's who of Satanists, obviously.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, another place worth mentioning is Plum Island off the coast of Long Island, which was associated with the Montauk Project.
Mhm.
Also big sex trafficking, hybridization stuff going on there, closer to home. Um, yeah, I'm not, let's see. Were you wanting to hear about more places or more people or what was? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I feel complete. I just wanted to let people get an idea of how global this is.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's
How
it's
many of their locations, like the Twin
yeah.
Towers, I talked about it yesterday in our episode that the Twin Towers went up when Saturn was in Gemini in tropical astrology and went down when Saturn was in Gemini, having their Saturn return because Saturn
Yeah.
is the planet of the Satanists, because
Yeah.
Saturn is Satan and all of that sort of
Yeah,
stuff.
the whole life cycle of the World Trade Center buildings was explicitly intended as a satanic ritual
Yeah,
that was being planned as early as the 1930s. Like this goes
yeah,
back a long time. I definitely recommend Wendy Hoffman's memoir, The Enslaved Queen.
yeah.
She talks about the planning of the 9/11 experience back in the 50s, and
Wow.
she was in some of the rooms where that was being planned, and it was like,
Yeah.
oh, okay.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, it feels obvious to someone like me, but also to hear it from you, because I know you've actually been in the underground bunkers
mhm.
under the Twin Towers before they
Yeah,
went down, back
yeah,
in the 90s. So
yeah,
it's important for people to hear this because even our major events, our major world events that brought us together and divided us, it's total mind control. Like, kill
yeah,
yourself, don't kill yourself. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
I don't know what the term for that is, where they tell you to do something, but they also tell you to do the opposite.
Usually double bind, but
Double bind, yes. I mean, just the how we're in a society where we're all under double bind programming where we're told to save our money and constantly buy everything. I mean, just
Yeah.
even down to that level. So, Alondra, thank you so much for being here and sharing all
Oh,
of this. We're definitely
yeah.
going to have you on for a part two. Brittany, is there
Cool.
anything you want to ask before we?
No, I know you're on a time crunch, but I just want to say thank you so much for just being so courageous and really showing up in a way that is expanding consciousness in a way that not many people are yet. And I really am grateful that we got to experience this with you. So thank
Oh,
you. And I'm
yeah.
excited for part two for sure.
Yeah. So happy to meet you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm also excited for more parts. Yay.
Alondra, can you tell us where to find you and how to work with you?
Yeah. Well, my main spiritual work site is AntarianJourneys.com. So Antarean is that first word. It's a bit of a weird one, but from Antares, the star. So yeah, AntarianJourneys.com. I have an email list for the meditation groups. Those so people can email me for that, and I can share the email address with you.
Yeah,
Um,
we'll put it
yeah,
in the show notes below.
yeah, my own YouTube channel is just my name spelled out, no special characters or anything. So youtube.com/Alandra Markman, all one word. And that's where you can see some recordings of my meditation videos. Yeah.
All right, awesome. Uh,
Mhm.
Brittany, will you close out the space?
Of course. Oh, we just want to send so much gratitude for everyone that have been listening, all of our minds for just expanding into this space. And we're just going to denounce any interference or backlash through all time, space, dimension, parallel, and iteration, just placing divine protections around all of us. And as we just close this circle, we just open up our hearts to more expansion and understanding and allowing the light workers on the planet to continue to grow in numbers and with our power of our hearts. We just say this wheeling container is set and sealed for the highest and greatest good. And so it is.
And so it
Mm.
is. Aho.
Aho.
All right. Thank you all so much for joining us today for Ascend the Matrix podcast. I'll put all of Alondra's information in the show notes below. Go work with him. Go find him. He is incredible to work with, whether virtually or in person. I'm telling you that as a testimonial from myself. And again, Alondra, thank you for everything you're doing, and we'll see you next time on Ascend the Matrix.
Mm.